Ricky Nelson, the boy America watched grow up, and the lie that followed him into death. What if everything you thought you knew about one of America's biggest music legends was built on a lie? Not a small misunderstanding, not a harmless rumor. A full-blown, front-page, decades-long lie that chased a man's name even after he was gone. And here's the part that really gets under your skin. The truth was right there the whole time. Investigators found it. They published it, and the world mostly ignored it. Today, we're going to fix that. His name was Ricky Nelson. And before you say, "Oh yeah, that guy from the old TV show," hold on. Because this story goes so much deeper than that. This is about a boy who was handed fame before he even asked for it, who built something genuinely remarkable with his own two hands, who died in a tragedy, and whose memory was then dragged through the mud for 40 years straight. It's about what happens when the world decides who you are before you get a chance to show them who you've become. And it ends with a phone call, one single phone call, that saved 2 lives the night everything fell apart. Let's go back to the beginning. Eric Hilliard Nelson was born on May 8, 1940, in New Jersey. Nobody called him Eric. From practically the moment he could walk, he was Ricky. His father, Ozzie Nelson, had been a college football star and bandleader. His mother, Harriet, was a singer and performer. Together, they were the kind of all-American family that seemed almost too perfect to be real. And in 1944, they leaned right into that image by launching a radio comedy show based on their own home life. It was called The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. Cute concept, right? A family pretending to be themselves on the radio. But then in 1949, Ozzie did something that would shape young Ricky's entire existence. He put the real kids on the air. His older son David was 12. Ricky was just 8 years old. 8. And every week, millions of Americans tuned in to hear this shy, asthmatic, quietly awkward little boy play a version of himself for their entertainment. Think about what that does to a kid. Your childhood isn't really yours. It belongs to the audience. Every milestone, every growth spurt, every voice crack, broadcasted. By 1952, the family moved to television. The show ran for 14 years. 14 years of America watching Ricky Nelson grow up in their living rooms. By the time he was a teenager, people felt like they knew him personally. He wasn't just a celebrity, he was like a neighbor's kid. And that connection? That was the launch pad no other rock star in history has ever had. All he needed was a reason to sing. Now here's where it gets good. In 1957, 16-year-old Ricky had a girlfriend. And this girlfriend was absolutely obsessed with Elvis Presley. She wouldn't stop talking about him. You know how it is. One person in the room completely infatuated with someone else's favorite artist, going on and on. And Ricky, being a 16-year-old boy with something to prove, told her flat out, "I'm going to make a record too." Bold move. Most kids making that promise have zero way to back it up. But Ricky wasn't most kids. He walked into his father's studio, recorded a cover of Fats Domino's "I'm Walkin', and then did something absolutely no other young musician in America could do. He performed it on his own national television show. The date was April 10, 1957. Millions of families were already watching. And when this familiar, wholesome, good-looking kid they'd watched grow up since he was in short pants suddenly stepped forward and belted out rock and roll, the country lost its mind. The record exploded. A teenage dare had just accidentally launched one of the biggest careers in American music history. And Ozzie Nelson, who was no fool, saw exactly what was happening. He understood television better than almost anyone alive at the time. He started ending every episode with one of Ricky's musical performances. And here's the genius move. He deliberately kept his son off the other big shows. No American Bandstand. No Ed Sullivan. If you wanted to see Ricky Nelson sing, you had to tune in to the family show. Exclusive content before the internet even existed. One writer later described Ricky as the first rock video star, because Ozzie was pairing songs with moving images years before anyone had a name for what that was. The hits came fast and they came hard. Between 1957 and 1962, Ricky Nelson landed 30 top 40 hits. 30. The only 2 names doing better were Elvis Presley and Pat Boone. And for a stretch in 1958 and 59, Ricky was actually charting more top 40 songs than Elvis. Let that sink in. The kid from the sitcom was, for a moment, outpacing the king of rock and roll himself. Then came the song that put his name in the history books permanently. It was called Poor Little Fool. And here's a funny little twist. Ricky didn't even want it released. He didn't like it. It had been written by a 15-year-old girl named Sharon Sheely, pouring her heartbreak out after a bad breakup. But when it dropped in the summer of 1958, it didn't just become a hit. On August 4, 1958, Poor Little Fool became the #1 song on Billboard's brand new chart, the Hot 100, the same chart we still use today. Think about every song that has ever topped that chart. Every Beatles record, every Michael Jackson smash, every modern mega hit you can name. The very first one, #1, Song 1, Day 1, was Ricky Nelson. A kid who didn't even like the song sold over 2 million copies of it. And let's shut down something right here. He was not a manufactured puppet. He had a real band. His guitarist was a teenager named James Burton, who would later go on to play for Elvis himself, and eventually be inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame. John Fogerty, of Creedence Clearwater Revival, once bristled at anyone calling Nelson a lightweight. Those early records, Fogerty said, were absolutely classic rock and roll, pure, genuine, the real thing. On his 21st birthday, Ricky made a decision. He was done with the kid's name. From that point forward, on records and in public, he was Rick Nelson. Grown, serious, and he came out swinging. That same year he released a double-sided single that became the high point of his whole career. Side A was Traveling Man, a globe-trotting, feel-good number that shot straight to #1. Flip it over, and you had Hello Mary Lou, with a James Burton guitar solo so sharp and so memorable that players still study it today. Worldwide smash, 2 #1s, a movie career on the side. He'd held his own opposite John Wayne and Dean Martin in Rio Bravo, and Wayne himself said the kid brought in a whole new, younger crowd. Life was good. And then 1964 happened. The Beatles landed in America, and the ground shifted under everyone who came before them. The clean-cut teen idols of the late 50s suddenly looked like something from a museum. Radio taste changed almost overnight. Rick Nelson, who had ruled the charts just 2 years before, watched the hits dry up. In 1966, after 14 years on the air, the family television show was finally canceled. The platform that had made him was simply gone. Here's where lesser artists fold. Here's where you take the oldies circuit money and slowly fade out. Rick did something braver. He went somewhere almost nobody was going yet. A blend of rock and country that the industry didn't even have proper language for. In 1969, he put together a band called the Stone Canyon Band. His bass player was a young musician named Randy Meisner. You might know that name. Randy Meisner walked out of Rick Nelson's band and went on to help found the Eagles. Stop and sit with that for a second. Rick Nelson, written off as a washed-up teen idol, was quietly in the room where California country rock was being invented. The sound that would define the entire 1970s. The Eagles, Linda Ronstadt, that whole wave, had roots running directly back to Rick's band. He wasn't a relic, he was a pioneer. The world just hadn't caught up yet. And then came the night that nearly broke him. October 15, 1971. Madison Square Garden. A rock and roll revival concert. The kind of show packed with nostalgic acts, where audiences come specifically to hear the old songs played exactly as remembered. Chuck Berry was there. Bo Diddley was there. And Rick Nelson walked out. Long hair, bell-bottoms, purple velvet shirt, and opened with the old hits. People were happy. Then he reached for something new. A country rock version of a Rolling Stones song. And the booing started. He was stunned. He cut the set short and walked off. He vowed he would never play an oldies show again. As far as he was concerned, his own fans had just punished him for daring to grow. But here's where the truth gets complicated. The booing absolutely happened, but why it happened is genuinely disputed to this day. The promoter thought the crowd rejected anything modern, but Rick was later told the booing wasn't even aimed at him. that it was a reaction to a disturbance near the back of the room. Police removing someone. All of it erupting right as he was on stage. One of his own bandmates insisted he actually went over just fine, and that the noise had nothing to do with the music. The boos that broke his heart may not have been meant for him at all, but he felt them, and he went home, and turned that pain into something. He called it Garden Party. He filled it with inside references to that night, and built it around one hard-won idea. You can't please everyone, so you've got to please yourself. It went to number 6 in 1972, his first top 10 hit in 8 years, a comeback made entirely out of refusing to be bitter. Off stage, though, life was unraveling. His marriage to Kristen Harmon, daughter of Heisman Trophy winner Tom Harmon, sister of actor Mark Harmon, had once been called the wedding of the year by Life magazine. By the late 70s it was over, and the divorce cost more than $1 million. He was alone, increasingly in debt, and doing the only thing he'd ever really known: getting on planes, playing shows, town after town, trying to stay afloat. In 1985, he bought a Douglas DC-3. It was built in 1944. Old, storied, historically interesting. Exactly the kind of thing Rick would fall for. His sons said he loved the idea of flying in a plane with that much history behind it. But the plane was trouble, engine problems, mechanical failures. It had already made him miss a major concert earlier that year. Still, he kept it. On December 31, 1985, the plane took off from Alabama, headed for a New Year's Eve show in Dallas. On board were Rick, his fiancée Helen Blair, several band members and crew, and 2 pilots. Somewhere over northeast Texas, fire broke out in the rear of the cabin. The pilots fought to bring it down and managed a crash landing in a field near the small town of DeKalb, clipping power lines and trees on the way in. The 2 pilots survived by escaping through the cockpit windows. Everyone in the cabin behind them did not. Rick Nelson was 45 years old. That should have been the whole story. A tragic accident, an old plane, a fire no one could stop. But within days, a different story started spreading. The whisper was that the fire hadn't come from the plane at all, that people on board had been doing something reckless with illegal substances and had caused the blaze themselves. It was ugly. It was sensational. It ran on front pages. And it stuck. There was one problem: it was not true. Federal investigators spent more than a year examining that wreckage. Their 1987 report was clear. The fire originated in the rear of the cabin, near the floor, consistent with the area of a troublesome cabin heater the crew had dealt with before. And on the rumor specifically, yes, toxicology found trace amounts of certain substances in some of the bodies. But investigators found no evidence of drug use during the flight, and no related paraphernalia anywhere in the wreckage. The theory wasn't just unproven, it was directly ruled out. Decades later, Rick's twin sons Gunnar and Matthew revealed how it likely started. A reporter at the crash site watched an investigator sorting through luggage, shampoo, hairspray, ordinary travel items, and asked whether they'd be checking for illegal substances. The investigator gave a routine answer: "We check for everything." That one offhand line became a false and devastating story sent out across the newswires. And the family has been fighting it ever since. Now here's the full picture. Rick Nelson died $4 million in debt. His twin sons spent the better part of a decade paying it off. And just over a year after the crash, in January 1987, he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The man who inducted him was John Fogerty, who stood at that podium and admitted simply, as a kid, he had wanted to be Ricky Nelson. Bob Dylan wrote about him with genuine admiration. Dylan was still performing Garden Party on stage in recent years, passing that song to audiences who weren't even born when Rick wrote it. And in 2025, marking 40 years since that New Year's Eve, Gunnar and Matthew Nelson released a book to set the record straight once and for all. They also shared one detail that stops you cold. The twins had originally planned to be on that plane. The night before, their father called and told them to take a commercial flight instead. That phone call saved their lives. So here's what they got wrong about Rick Nelson. It's easy to label him teen idol and move on. Pretty face, 50s novelty. But that label is exactly the misunderstanding he spent his whole adult life pushing against. This was a genuine musician who scored the first #1 record in modern chart history, a pioneer who helped invent country rock while the critics were busy looking the other way. An innovator whose father was making music videos before the world had a word for them. And a man who, when his own crowd seemed to turn on him, responded not with bitterness, but with a song about staying true to yourself. His voice is woven into the very foundation of music we still listen to today. The first #1. The roots of a whole genre. A family dynasty. Ozzy in the 30s. Rick in the 50s and 60s. Gunnar and Matthew in 1990. 3 generations of #1 hits. A world record that still stands. And underneath all of it, a real person who deserved far better than the lie that chased his name for 40 years. The truth was always there. It just needed someone willing to say it out loud. If this story moved you, share it with someone who loves real music history. And drop a comment. Had you ever heard that rumor about the crash? Did you believe it? And what's your favorite Rick Nelson song? Traveling Man, Hello Mary Lou, or Garden Party? Let's talk. And if you want more stories like this one, the real stories, the ones that got buried, make sure you're subscribed, because the next one is just as good. See you there.